On April 30th, 2025, the streets of Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso, pulsed with a sea of humanity. The city, known for its vibrant culture and bustling markets, had transformed into a focal point of political fervor. The air was thick with anticipation and the sounds of chanting voices echoed through the streets, creating an atmosphere charged with emotion and determination. Thousands had gathered to demonstrate their unwavering support for Ibrahim Traore, the nation's enigmatic military leader. The crowd, a diverse mix of men, women and children, held banners and posters high, each emblazoned with messages of solidarity and hope. The energy was palpable, as if the very ground beneath them was vibrating with the collective will of the people. Traore, who seized power in a September 2022 coup, had called for this rally in the wake of what his government described as a foiled coup attempt. His voice, strong and resolute, carried over the sea of faces as he addressed the crowd. He spoke of resilience, of the need to stand united against those who would seek to undermine their sovereignty. His words were met with thunderous applause and chants of support. He accused unnamed foreign powers of orchestrating the plot, further stoking the flames of nationalistic fervor that had been steadily growing since his ascension. The crowd responded with fervent cries, their voices rising in unison against the perceived external threats. Nationalist slogans filled the air, a testament to the deep-seated desire for self-determination and independence from foreign influence. The rally served as a potent reminder of Traore's grip on power. His ability to mobilize such a massive show of support was a clear indication of his influence and the loyalty he commanded. The streets were awash with the colors of the national flag, and the air was filled with the sounds of patriotic songs and chants. Banners bearing his image and slogans denouncing foreign interference were ubiquitous. They fluttered in the breeze, a visual representation of the people's defiance and their unwavering support for their leader. Each banner told a story of resistance, of a nation determined to chart its own course. The crowd, a mix of young and old, chanted slogans praising Traore as a defender of Burkina Faso's sovereignty. Their voices, though varied in age and background, were united in their message. They saw in Traore a protector, someone who would stand up for their rights and their future. This public display of support came at a time when Traore faced mounting criticism, both domestically and internationally, over his handling of the country's myriad crises. Despite the challenges, the rally was a clear message to his detractors that he still had the backing of a significant portion of the population. The demonstrators' presence was a testament to their belief in his leadership and their hope for a better future under his guidance. The rally's significance extended far beyond the borders of Burkina Faso. It was a beacon of resistance and a call to action for other nations facing similar struggles. The images and stories from Ouagadougou spread quickly, resonating with people across the continent and beyond. It was a reminder that the fight for sovereignty and self-determination was a shared struggle, one that transcended national boundaries. It served as a lightning rod for similar sentiments brewing across West Africa, a region grappling with its own legacy of colonialism and the often invisible hand of foreign influence. The rally in Ouagadougou was a powerful statement, a declaration that the people of West Africa were ready to take control of their own destinies. The signs of Pan-African unity were everywhere, a symbol of the growing movement towards regional solidarity and cooperation. The events in Ouagadougou resonated with a younger generation disillusioned by the perceived failures of their governments and increasingly receptive to Pan-African ideals of unity and self-determination. They saw in the rally a chance to voice their frustrations and their hopes for a brighter future. The youth, holding Pan-African flags and chanting for unity, represented a new wave of activism and a renewed commitment to the ideals of freedom and independence. The rally was not just a moment in time, but a catalyst for change, inspiring a generation to dream of a better, more united Africa. The tremors of the pro-Traore rally in Ouagadougou were felt far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. The rally, which saw thousands of people taking to the streets, was a powerful demonstration of the people's desire for change and their support for Traore's vision. The energy and determination of the protesters in Ouagadougou resonated deeply with many across the region, sparking a wave of solidarity and activism. In neighboring Liberia, a nation still bearing the scars of its own turbulent past, the echoes of the Ouagadougou rally were particularly poignant. Liberia, with its history of civil wars and political instability, has long struggled to find a path to lasting peace and prosperity. The memories of conflict are still fresh in the minds of many Liberians, and the sight of people rising up in Burkina Faso reignited a sense of urgency and solidarity among them. A wave of solidarity protests erupted. These protests were not just about supporting the movement in Burkina Faso, they were also a reflection of the deep-seated frustrations and aspirations of the Liberian people. The streets of Monrovia, the capital city, became a sea of banners and placards as citizens from all walks of life came together to voice their demands for justice, equality, and an end to foreign interference. Inspired by the events in Ouagadougou, Liberian activists and citizens took to the streets, drawing parallels between their own struggles and those of their Burkinabe counterparts. The chants and slogans echoed through the city, calling for Pan-African solidarity and a united front against neo-colonialism. The protesters were determined to make their voices heard, to show that they stood with their brothers and sisters in Burkina Faso, and to demand a better future for themselves and their country. Echoing the calls for Pan-African solidarity and a rejection of perceived Western interference in the region, the Liberian protesters carried Pan-African flags and signs denouncing foreign influence. They believed that true progress and development could only be achieved through unity and self-determination, free from the meddling of external powers. The atmosphere was charged with a sense of purpose and determination, as the protesters marched through the streets, their voices rising in unison. These protests, however, were met with a swift and forceful response from the Liberian authorities. The government, wary of the potential for unrest and instability, deployed security forces to maintain order. Riot police in full gear confronted the protesters, and tensions quickly escalated. The sight of heavily armed officers clashing with unarmed demonstrators was a stark reminder of the challenges that still faced the nation. On May 1, 2025, a group of demonstrators gathered outside the Ivorian embassy in Monrovia, intending to deliver a petition denouncing what they saw as Ivory Coast's role in destabilizing Burkina Faso. The protesters accused the Ivorian government of meddling in the affairs of their neighbor, and they demanded an end to such actions. The atmosphere outside the embassy was tense, as the demonstrators prepared to make their voices heard. The protest, however, quickly escalated. What began as a peaceful demonstration soon turned chaotic as emotions ran high. The protesters, frustrated by what they saw as a lack of response from the embassy officials, began to push against the barriers set up by the security forces. The situation grew increasingly volatile, with both sides refusing to back down. Tensions flared as the demonstrators attempted to breach the embassy's security perimeter, leading to clashes with Liberian security forces. The police, determined to maintain control, used tear gas and batons to disperse the crowd. The air was thick with smoke, and the sounds of shouting and chaos filled the streets. The once peaceful protest had turned into a scene of confrontation and conflict. The Liberian government, caught off guard by the intensity of the protests, responded with a heavy hand. The authorities were unprepared for the scale and fervor of the demonstrations, and their response was swift and severe. Security forces were deployed in large numbers, and the crackdown on the protesters was brutal. The government's actions drew widespread condemnation from both domestic and international observers. Several protesters were arrested, accused of inciting violence and unlawful assembly. The arrests only served to further inflame the situation, as the demonstrators saw their comrades being taken away in handcuffs. The sense of injustice and anger among the protesters grew, and the calls for justice and accountability became even louder. The Liberian government, caught off guard by the intensity of the protests, responded with a heavy hand. The authorities were unprepared for the scale and fervor of the demonstrations, and their response was swift and severe. Security forces were deployed in large numbers, and the crackdown on the protesters was brutal. The government's actions drew widespread condemnation from both domestic and international observers. Several protesters were arrested, accused of inciting violence and unlawful assembly. The arrests only served to further inflame the situation, as the demonstrators saw their comrades being taken away in handcuffs. The sense of injustice and anger among the protesters grew, and the calls for justice and accountability became even louder. Among those detained was Marquis Nebo, a prominent youth leader known for his fiery rhetoric against neo-colonialism. Nebo had been a vocal critic of foreign interference in African affairs, and his arrest was seen as a direct attack on the movement for Pan-African solidarity. His detention sparked outrage among his supporters and added fuel to the already raging fire of discontent. The arrest sparked outrage among activist groups and human rights organizations who condemned the government's response as disproportionate and a violation of the right to peaceful assembly. They called for the immediate release of the detained protesters and demanded that the government respect the rights of its citizens to express their views and grievances. The protests in Liberia, inspired by the events in Ouagadougou, highlighted the deep-seated issues and aspirations of the Liberian people. They were a powerful reminder of the enduring struggle for justice, equality, and self-determination in the face of external and internal challenges. As the world watched, the voices of the Liberian protesters echoed across the region, calling for a brighter and more just future for all. The situation in Monrovia remained tense in the aftermath of the protests. The Liberian government defended its actions, asserting that the arrests were necessary to maintain order and protect diplomatic property. However, the government's narrative was met with skepticism by many who saw the crackdown as an attempt to stifle dissent and appease foreign powers. The accusations leveled by the protesters added another layer of complexity to the situation. They alleged that the Ivorian government, potentially with the backing of Western nations, was involved in a clandestine effort to undermine Traore's regime. While these claims lacked concrete evidence, they resonated with a deep-seated mistrust of foreign influence that permeated segments of Liberian society. The protests and subsequent arrests shone a spotlight on the delicate balancing act faced by the Liberian government. On one hand, it was compelled to uphold the rule of law and protect diplomatic missions within its borders. On the other hand, it had to contend with a population increasingly sensitive to any perceived infringement on their sovereignty and right to express their views freely. The protests in Liberia were not isolated incidents. They were part of a broader movement that has been gaining momentum across the African continent. In recent years, there has been a noticeable rise in Pan-African sentiment, driven by a collective desire for change and a renewed sense of unity among African nations. This movement is not confined to any single country or region. It is a continent-wide phenomenon that is reshaping the political and social landscape of Africa. They formed part of a larger trend of growing Pan-African sentiment sweeping across the region. This sentiment is characterized by a shared vision of a united Africa, free from the shackles of colonialism and neo-colonialism. It is a vision that seeks to address the historical injustices that have plagued the continent and to build a future based on mutual respect, cooperation, and solidarity among African nations. Fueled by social media and a shared sense of historical grievance, this resurgence of Pan-Africanism found fertile ground amongst a younger generation disillusioned by the perceived failures of their governments and the lingering effects of colonialism. Social media platforms have played a crucial role in this movement, allowing young Africans to connect with each other, share their experiences, and mobilize for collective action. Through hashtags, viral videos, and online campaigns, the message of Pan-Africanism has reached millions, inspiring a new generation to take up the mantle of their forebears and fight for a better future. This new wave of Pan-Africanism differed from its predecessors in its decentralized nature and its focus on concrete issues. Unlike the Pan-African movements of the past, which often centered around charismatic leaders and grand ideological visions, this new wave is driven by grassroots activism and a pragmatic approach to problem-solving. It is a movement that is rooted in the everyday struggles of ordinary Africans and seeks to address the specific challenges they face, from economic inequality and political corruption to social injustice and environmental degradation. It was less about grand pronouncements of unity and more about addressing the everyday realities of economic inequality, political instability, and the pervasive influence of foreign powers. The movement recognizes that true Pan-African unity can only be achieved by tackling these issues head-on and creating a more just and equitable society for all Africans. This pragmatic approach has resonated with many, leading to a surge in support for Pan-African initiatives and a growing sense of solidarity among African nations. The protests in support of Traore, despite his authoritarian tendencies, were a testament to this evolving ideology. While some may view his leadership with skepticism, many see him as a symbol of resistance against foreign interference and a champion of African sovereignty. This complex dynamic highlights the nuanced nature of the new Pan-African movement, which is not bound by rigid ideological lines, but is instead driven by a shared desire for self-determination and empowerment. The resurgence of Pan-Africanism presented both opportunities and challenges for the region. On one hand, it has the potential to galvanize a collective response to shared problems and foster greater regional integration. By working together, African nations can pool their resources, share their expertise, and develop innovative solutions to the continent's most pressing issues. This spirit of collaboration and mutual support is at the heart of the Pan-African vision and has the power to transform the continent for the better. On the one hand, it had the potential to galvanize a collective response to shared problems and foster greater regional integration. This renewed sense of unity and purpose can help to break down the barriers that have historically divided African nations and create a more cohesive and resilient continent. By embracing the principles of Pan-Africanism, African leaders and citizens alike can work together to build a brighter future for all. On the other hand, it carried the risk of being hijacked by nationalist and populist agendas, potentially exacerbating existing tensions and undermining regional stability. The challenge lies in ensuring that the movement remains true to its core principles of unity, solidarity, and justice, and does not become a tool for divisive or self-serving interests. As the new wave of Pan-Africanism continues to evolve, it will be crucial for its leaders and supporters to navigate these complexities and stay focused on the ultimate goal of a united and prosperous Africa.